Good morning, everyone, and welcome to you, Chief Constable, and your team to our October meeting in public. Welcome also to anyone joining us online, and thank you for your interest in the work of the Northern Ireland Policing Board and indeed in policing. We're also very pleased to welcome the Information Commissioner, John Edwards, who has very helpfully agreed to attend today to brief us on the key findings of his investigation on the data breach. The data breach was a critical incident that had serious reverberations within and outside of the PSNI. The remedial actions of the PSNI in response to the breach is an issue that has featured on our agenda and discussions over the past 13 months. And in the course of that period, they remain under scrutiny by the board even now. So the findings from your investigation mark a further important development, and I know that members have some questions. I also am aware that you, John, are limited in time, so I'll hand over to you, Commissioner, to make some opening remarks, and we can then take some questions. And also, if you have anything to add, Chief Constable, please feel free to do so. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, members, for the opportunity to appear here. I don't know if any of you heard my interview on radio this morning, but I was challenged by an interviewer to say, well, no one in this organisation has been held to account, meaning no one's been fired. And I had to explain, look, accountability comes in many forms, and the Chief Constable will later today be sitting in front of the Northern Ireland Policing Board, and that is a principal form of accountability in this community. I am a regulator, the Information Commissioner. It is my task to administer the UK General Data Protection Regulations and the Data Protection Act to ensure that those entrusted with personal data of people of the United Kingdom can expect that data to be kept safely and securely and not misused. And sadly, the Police Service of Northern Ireland failed in that responsibility in relation to the full list of the staff and commissioned and non-commissioned staff of the organisation, and the full list was published online. Our job as the regulator was to examine the circumstances under which that occurred, because there can be organisations which have all the expected measures in place and yet still mishaps occur. The obligation that I'm there to administer is to ensure that all reasonable steps have been taken to protect personal data. So we looked at the policies, the procedures, the training. We looked at the way in which this particular event occurred. It was in response to a Freedom of Information request about aspects of the staffing makeup. A spreadsheet was uploaded to a public-facing site that facilitates the making of Freedom of Information requests. That spreadsheet contained in a concealed form a full list of the staff's name, rank, the office that they were associated with, and their number. This is a not unknown problem. My home jurisdiction of New Zealand, this kind of event was a bane because it has happened on a number of occasions, both in my previous role and in the current job. We have issued instructions about how to deal with the risks associated with uploading spreadsheets containing personal data. On examination and investigation, we found that there were absent policies, insufficient training, and insufficient checks, to the degree that we felt we had no option but to conclude that the PSNI had failed in its responsibilities to protect that data. We published in May a notice of intention to issue an enforcement notice, setting out the steps that we would require PSNI to take to bring itself into conformance with the law and to avoid the recurrence of a similar event in future. We also published an intention to fine the PSNI £750,000, and I'm happy to discuss how we came to that figure in a moment. But we invited representations from PSNI. I need to just pause and recognise that from the very start, from the initial notification by PSNI to our office, as it was obliged to do, we have had full cooperation. We've had open books. We have seen no defensiveness. We have seen a constructive engagement and a willingness to learn and put things right. To the extent that when I met with Chief Constable in May and explained that we would be issuing these notices, he asked what was going to be in the enforcement notice, what we were asking of him. He said, I'm going to do that as a priority. Now, I hear that a lot, and sometimes in the glare of the lights and the cameras, these promises are made and other priorities intrude. I was very pleased and reassured to find that in the period that we gave for representations, PSNI had implemented each of the recommendations that we'd made, providing, I think, a considerable degree of reassurance to the community and to the staff that the organisation has learned from this and that they have redoubled efforts to keep personal information safe. As a result of the actions taken by PSNI, I have not felt it necessary to proceed with issuing an enforcement notice. We have, however, felt obliged to proceed with the fine. We considered the representations made by PSNI, particularly noting the straitened financial circumstances it finds itself in, and particularly conscious of a desire on my part not to withdraw essential services and resources from an already strained organisation, but also conscious of the needs of the community and those wronged by the errors, and the will of Parliament, which has said to me, for the most egregious cases, there is the option of issuing a monetary penalty. As a result, we decided not to reduce the penalty from the amount signalled in May. Our assessment included the judgment that if we had not been dealing with a public sector authority with limited finances, an organisation which, when we issue a fine, we are taking money away from the community. If it had been a private organisation, the fine would have been in the region of £5.6 million. So that puts in context for you some of the considerations that we've taken into account. But I think the public demands recognition of the seriousness of an event like this. I have been asked where this matter rates in the scale of breaches that we've seen in the public sector. In my time in this job and in my previous job, this has to be right at the edge of the most serious. There's a considerable quantum involved. That's nearly 10,000 people, and the impact on those individuals, on many of them, has been profound. And you will see in the statements that we've issued some testimony from those who've felt no option but to leave the service and go give away a career that they loved. People who have felt in fear for their own personal security. People whose children have been waking with nightmares of being attacked as a result of the exposure of information which many took considerable steps to conceal. So that's the background and the conclusion. I would like to finish on a positive note that, as I say, I think we conclude this matter confident that significant improvements have been made, and the public can be reassured that PSNI does take its obligations in relation to personal data very seriously and has learned from this episode and improved the safeguards around personal data.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner. Not to take away from the very serious nature of the data breach, it is reassuring for us as an accountability body that you're telling us that the PSNI have learned and you're convinced that it's looking forward, we're in a much better place now. So thank you for that. On the financial penalty levied, as a board, we too are very disappointed on the size of the financial penalty imposed, given the financial pressures of not just the PSNI, but the wider public services and public finances here, but understand the responsibilities that your office in respect of determining that. And just before we move on, I have a question for you from Kate Laverty, and then one from Gerry.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, thank you so much for your report. I'm pleased to hear you reference the transparency of the police in helping you draw your conclusions. For me, I wanted to understand, the Board and the PSNI jointly commissioned an independent review of PSNI procedures to provide us with the assurance around policy, practice and procedures in respect to the management of personal data. But could you tell me a bit more about what other issues there were outside of this review that you asked the PSNI to remedy through your investigations, and maybe how they contributed then to your decision not to issue an enforcement notice?
Principally, we found that there were gaps in the policies associated with the pathway from a request through to publication. We found deficiencies in quality assurance in checking. And we found that training had been not offered in the way that we would have hoped. And each of those has been remedied. We've seen the changes to policy. We've got to remember that the Freedom of Information Act is another really important mechanism for public accountability. And it's important that in providing information to the public, PSNI ensures that it does not release information which could put people in peril. So we've got to balance that need for the public to have ready access and for the organisation to be accountable to the public through that important mechanism, but still to have sufficient checks to ensure unintended data is not leaked out through that process.
Okay, thank you. Gerry?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your briefing and that. And you've said the word yourself. It was perhaps the most devastating breach in any of the police services, and of course, it had a profound human and personal effect on so many people, 10,000 people. But it's really a simple question: whether it was 5.6 million or 750,000, where does the money go? Because this is public service. Is it public money in the first place, and does it go somewhere else in the public system, or where does it go?
As a matter of public administration, a fine is paid. It goes to the Crown account. The ICO has an agreement with the Treasury to retain fines up to a certain level to recoup the cost of those enforcements. But I think that this will have very little effect on that. But yeah, it is paid into HMT.
In short, the bulk of it goes to the Treasury.
Yes.
It just strikes me that it's another argument not to put for the 750,000 come out of the resources which are in rock bottom. But yeah, you made a point. Thank you.
The point you're making is one of policy. I might well agree with you, but the law in the UK GDPR provides for these penalties. It does not differentiate between public authorities and private authorities. So it's not within my gift to say, well, there's a money go around that makes no sense, so I'm not going to execute Parliament's will in relation to a public authority. I have taken the opportunity to revise our approach to the public sector, recognising exactly the point you make. I am concerned at the money go round aspect you describe. I'm also very concerned about, particularly in devolved communities, where taking money out by way of a monetary penalty actually impacts the individuals concerned by withdrawing services from their community. So in many senses, I take, for example, an NHS trust in Scotland. If I fine them for a breach which has affected the individuals in that community, I'm basically re-victimising those victims. I'm punishing them twice. So I recognise the anomaly you describe, but I have to work within the framework that Parliament has delivered.
Thank you, that's very helpful.
Thank you. I have one final question from Trevor, and then Chief Constable, I'll open it up to you to add any comments you might have.
I suppose maybe following on from Gerry's point about the level of the fine, and actually your example you've used in terms of the punishment to the Scottish Health and those who's affected by that. Do you not see, John, actually, given that there's serious litigation around this case, that it's like a double jeopardy for the police as well, because they're going to pay those who've been affected in terms of the litigation process, but equally pay yourselves? And on a further point, I suppose, actually, if you ever retire from the ACO, I would welcome to see you as regulating some of the likes of the NI water in this country, because the fines are much, much smaller and some of the crimes they're committing are much, much worse.
I'll be back in touch at the end of my term. Sorry, I was distracted by my own sense of humour. Could you just remind me the ask there?
So my point is, there's a degree of double jeopardy.
Oh, yes, sorry, of course. Look, there is an element of that, but there are parallel tracks in the law. Individuals' rights and remedies are available through the courts. Often it's not economic for an individual to pursue their remedies in relation to a data breach. Where there's a large mass one like this, there are litigation firms that step in and present class actions. So yes, those individuals are entitled under the law to be put back in the position that they were before the breach by way of compensation. That's quite different from a regulator delivering a penalty for failure to meet regulated obligations.
Okay, thank you. Chief Constable?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, John. I mean, I want to start really by just addressing the issue of the fine of £750,000, which of course is a significant sum of money with regards to last August data breach. That's something that I wouldn't have wanted. However, the seriousness of last year's data breach is well understood by everybody here, not least of which by myself. The impact on our staff will never be forgotten and will not be underestimated. And as I've said before, this should be a lesson to every organisation, both in policing and beyond. The majority of the cost of that fine, £610,000, was accounted for against last year's budget. A further £140,000 will now be charged against our budget in the current financial year. Although the ICO found it necessary to fine the organisation, as John's mentioned, I'm very pleased that they've taken the decision not to issue an enforcement notice. That decision is as a direct result of the huge amount of work that we've done in evidencing to the ICO that we've implemented the changes recommended to improve the security of personal information in the PSNI, in particular when responding to freedom of information requests. The Commissioner, as he's mentioned this morning, actually informed me that promises are often made to undertake remedial work after a data breach has occurred, but all too often these are not sufficiently followed through after the story has calmed down. But in this case of the PSNI, the issues were resolutely focused upon and addressed in the interests of everybody, not least of which our staff. As I've made clear, the impact of the data loss that it's had on our officers and staff can never be understated, and as a result of this announcement, it will once again be in the forefront of their minds. As an organisation, we're in an entirely different place from where we were last August, and we've continued to work to devalue the compromised data set. We've also provided significant crime prevention advice to our officers and our staff and their families by our online tools, advice clinics and home visits, and through the Universal Offer for Security, we funded support for 90% of our staff around their own security. I do want to personally thank the ICO and the Commissioner for the professionalism, dedication and approach to this independent examination of the circumstances behind the data breach, and to reassure everybody we'll continue to progress the recommendations made by the ICO and also the recommendations made by the already referred to this morning independent review team. We'll ensure that information security and data protection matters are afforded the support and attention they critically deserve. And we look forward to this matter being concluded with the litigation that again has already been mentioned this morning, and for the organisation to move forward. I think that's all I wish to say, Chair, on that particular issue, but also if there's any questions of me on that issue, I'm happy to take them.
Frank?
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. My question's not for Chief Constable, but for the Commission, and it's a follow-up to Gerry's question about the actual money itself and where the money finds its home. Given that all the recommendations that you suggested or you said had to be implemented, and given the fact that they were all implemented thoroughly by the PSNI, and given the fact that there's going to be learning taken from this that can be shared across all the constabularies across the UK, might it not be more prudent to point that money back to the PSNI for the implementation of your recommendations?
Thank you. I don't have that option. The penalty setting process is not a negotiation. We have a detailed fining guidance policy which we apply that includes an obligation to consider aggravating and mitigating factors. The fact that PSNI has worked with us, cooperated with our investigation, and has implemented changes are taken into account in settling on the final account. But I don't have the option of saying the fine under the Act will be £750,000, which I now direct you to spend on upgrading your systems. I would like that power. I think that would be quite constructive, but it doesn't exist in the law at the moment.
Thank you. And there doesn't appear to be any further questions. Just to summarise, and I'm aware that the time is precious for yourself. You're having to move on. Really appreciate your time that you've taken to come along to speak to us, and the good work of your team in carrying out the comprehensive investigation. As a board, we very much remain very mindful, as has been stated already, of the immense impact of that this data breach has had within the PSNI and all the officers and staff. You have our assurance as a board that we will continue to actively oversee the implementation of findings from your investigation alongside those from the independent review that has been spoken about already, that we jointly commissioned with the PSNI. So thank you again, and our Chief Executive will help you escape from here because the security doors are quite rigid. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to continue with today's meeting. Chief Constable, I just want to refer to your report and some of the issues in it. I'll open with resourcing, which is an ongoing issue, and then the revised environmental allowance known as REA and IODs. Earlier this morning, the board met with the Justice Minister, and suffice to say, resourcing on a number of fronts was centre stage in those discussions. One issue that falls from the data breach incident was the consideration of an REA revised environmental allowance for civilian staff, something that they have been calling for decades. Significant work was undertaken in July on this issue, and an interim payment was made at that time. A deadline was set for the 30th of September for resolution of other outstanding matters, including an annual review mechanism. Understand that good progress has been made on these issues, but we are past the agreed date of 30th of September, and this does need to be finalised. And hopefully you will touch on this later on, Chief. Another item that has been on our agenda is bringing change to the IOD scheme, Injuries on Duty scheme. We again underlined with the Minister the importance of speed around addressing these issues and the levels of frustration and distress felt by those going through the system. I'll move on now to the victim survey and the policing plan consultation. Chief, earlier this month, we published the consultation on our policing plan, and thank you for your input and that of your team into that. It is ambitious and chimes with many of the priorities set in the draft programme for government in terms of delivering a safer community. And of course, this month, the Executive published 2 new key strategies in respect of road safety and tackling violence against women and girls, both of which are critical strategies which continue to cause significant harm in our communities. PSNI is victim focused, which is one of the outcomes on the draft policing plan for 2025 to 2030. Clearly, this push towards improved delivery in this area could not have come at a more fitting time, given the findings from the Commission for Victims of Crime survey, which was released earlier this week. However, in order to deliver the plan, the PSNI as an organisation needs to be properly resourced. It needs to be properly resourced and enabled so that the community can have confidence in the service. We will be ensuring these issues and the importance and effective collaboration between the PSNI and other government agencies are reflected in our response as a board to the draft programme for government to the Executive. As always, I will finish on commending good service. As always, Chief Constable, your report highlights a lot of very positive work ongoing with officers and your staff. And some of our members have been at commendation events over the past few weeks to hear of those very, very positive accounts of professionalism and bravery. I was deeply humbled to attend the National Police Memorial Day along with yourself and many other representatives from Northern Ireland. That happened last Sunday, which is a sobering reminder of the sacrifice that so many officers have made across the UK and in this jurisdiction to serve their communities. So, Chief Constable, if we could now take your opening comments and move to questions beyond that.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, everybody, and obviously those people as well watching online. So September saw the publication of Northern Ireland Executive's draft programme for government, as you referenced, Chair. I welcome and strongly support the inclusion of ending violence against women and girls and safer communities as 2 of the 9 immediate priorities of the current mandate. My report this month provides details on the progress of the PSNI's Violence Against Women Action Plan since its introduction now 2 years ago, and outlines our sustained commitment as we look ahead for the next 5 years of that plan. The Executive's highly anticipated strategic framework to end violence against women and girls is therefore timely and important. Despite the huge challenges facing PSNI, playing our part in a societal effort to end violence against women and girls remains a key strategic priority. Policing will clearly be a key partner in both of the justice-themed programme for government priorities. We will play our part, but we need, as you've mentioned, Chair, and I'll continue to state until it's done, to be properly resourced to do so. For that reason, I was disappointed that policing was not front and centre and the subject of greater focus in the programme for government. I do welcome the recognition that police officer numbers are at an all-time low. They are. And that this is insufficient to respond to deal with the crime that we now face. The commitment to grow officer numbers to 7,500 in line with the New Decade, New Approach strategy is also positive, as that's mentioned in the programme. However, I do not think that the draft programme for government properly reflects the level of crisis facing the PSNI. We are now approaching a position, if indeed we are not already there, where we are unable to keep people as safe as we should be able to. I would like to see the justice and policing commitments strengthened and broadened. These cannot just be words on a page. We need to see these in cast iron. We need to see these as a cast iron commitment to see the PSNI restored at least to a minimum of 7,000 police officers in the next 3 years. The number of police officers and police staff required for the PSNI in the next decade needs to be formally agreed by the Northern Ireland Executive. Following recent analysis, as your Chief Constable, I would estimate that our police officer workforce should be 8,000 and our police staff towards 3,000. The Executive's draft plan is currently out for consultation, and I urge everyone, with an interest in promoting a safer, more secure and confident Northern Ireland, to engage with this process and call for the prioritisation of policing, ring-fence funding and support for our recovery plan to ensure our numbers are returned to 7,000 police officers in the next 3 years. September, as you mentioned, Chair, also witnessed our collective launch of the consultation on our policing plan for 2025 to 2030. This is another key document that sets out what we as a police service want to achieve over the next 5 years. It reflects our strategic direction, what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. My objective is to deliver a plan that is uncomplicated and understood by everyone. A plan that is victim focused, community focused and workforce focused. The 3 proposed outcomes should hopefully resonate with everybody. I wish to develop and deliver a policing plan that communities want and deserve, not a plan based on what the PSNI can only afford because of our poor funding. We cannot deliver effective policing without the support of the public and our partners. As with the Programme for Government consultation, I encourage everyone to take this opportunity to engage with and share their views in this consultation. Please tell us what you want us to do and help shape the plans for the future of the PSNI. Neither of these consultations could have come at a better time, given where we find ourselves as an organisation. I continue to get away from my desk to meet officers and staff, and I see what they do day in and day out. Unimaginably difficult jobs being done in an incredibly professional manner. It is truly remarkable. However, attempting to do everything, everywhere, all the time, is breaking the workforce. With officer and staff numbers at their lowest level since the formation of the PSNI, we simply cannot be, as you mentioned, Chair, as victim and community focused as we want or need to be. I am especially concerned that we will increasingly become an emergency response service rather than a proactive police service that is locally and neighbourhood problem solving focused, which is essential for a safe Northern Ireland. As you mentioned, Chair, last week saw the publication of the Victims of Crime survey from the Victims of Crime Commissioner. The results, albeit from a small sample of respondents, were incredibly disappointing for police and indeed more so for the whole criminal justice system. I'm very keen to get beneath the surface of this survey, as it somewhat contradicts the considerably larger Northern Ireland Policing Board 2023 survey that found 91% of people surveyed felt confident in contacting the PSNI and 7 in 10 were satisfied with the job the police were doing, while 2/3 were confident in the PSNI's ability to protect and serve. We must ensure that victims of crime feel listened to, supported, and that they have the confidence to come forward and report crime to us. I am committed to working closely with the Victims of Crime Commissioner to improve our response to victims, and I've already met her on a number of occasions. I addressed the board last month about the disgraceful events in the summer and the tireless work we're doing to protect victims of racially motivated hate crime. ACC Bobby Singleton briefed the Stormont executive only yesterday on this key issue. If we are going to effectively challenge and defeat this racism and hate, informed public debate is crucial. It is not something that the PSNI can or should do alone. Last week, we took the decision to remove offensive posters from lampposts in the Rathcoole area. We'd sought the support of partners in the Department of Infrastructure some time before to assist with that removal. That support did not materialise, and after a period of some 6 to 7 weeks, I want to be clear, this material should never have been removed, and after that period of 6 to 7 weeks, we removed it. Urgent action is needed to look at how public sectors engage with each other, share information and remove offensive material as quickly as possible. We're determined to seize the opportunity to get into a room with our partners to ensure we are all clear on the shared responsibility to do this and how we tackle racism in all its forms. On the 20th September, I was delighted to be joined by the Justice Minister, Naomi Long, and you, Chair, at the attestation ceremony for 28 new constables. This was the first attestation ceremony for some time due to our recruitment freeze, and it was a pleasure to celebrate the occasion with officers and their families and friends. I know we wish them all well, and we thank them for their service and their new careers, and we look forward to welcoming 200 more appointments in our ranks before March 2025. On the 24th September, I hosted the first of our Team PSNI events. The PSNI is a large organisation, and these events are essential in communicating with everybody about our future planning for the service, to listen to their views and acknowledge what they do. The day provided an opportunity for the service executive team to meet all of our colleagues from across the service and to begin addressing the issues raised in last year's Your Service, Your Voice survey. The feedback has been exceedingly good. Also on the 24th, I had the privilege of hosting our High Commendation Awards ceremony, as again you mentioned, Chair. I was delighted to be joined by our Justice Minister, her Permanent Under Secretary, the Chair of the Justice Committee, and Board Member Peter Osborne. Thank you for attending, Peter. These awards showed the range of incidents officers and staff are involved in on a daily basis. That's the story of the PSNI. Many of those awards were to officers who placed themselves in real danger to save lives. It was frankly inspiring and humbling, and each and every individual was rightly recognised for their bravery. It's these stories of day-to-day heroism that should be more routinely at the forefront of our thinking and our media reporting about this organisation. In policing and in wider society, a person's sacrifice and ability to act on behalf of others is something we all too often take for granted. The courage and professionalism displayed by these officers and staff is a true reflection of this organisation. I commend each one of them. They're a credit to their teams, the organisation, and their loved ones. Events like this acknowledge and thankfully celebrate our workforce. They're critically important. They're the very least we can do, and I look forward to hosting more in the future. Finally, on Sunday, and again as you mentioned, Chair, it was my honour to attend the National Police Memorial Day in Glasgow, where I met countless widows, family members, friends and colleagues of fallen officers from Northern Ireland and beyond. And I was delighted and grateful for your attendance, Chair, to that event. We will never forget the sacrifice and loss endured by those families. Thank you for allowing me my opening remarks, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thank you, Chief Constable. And before we move to questions, could I just once again, as I always do, remind members to take care around questions in order that they do not breach any sensitivity or ongoing proceedings. And on that note, I'm going to use Chair's privilege and ask the first question, which is around an item that has appeared in the BBC about probably a week ago on drug dealing. It started off with drug dealing in the A&E services of a particular hospital, and it seems to be snowballing into being in multiple hospitals and right across different parts of the hospitals. And this level of activity in the midst of some of the most vulnerable people in our society is taking place. I would just welcome your comments and remarks on that, please.
Yes, Chair, I saw the article, and I think, as you've remarked, we're ever more alive to the chronic drug addiction issues that we're facing in society. And we're seeing this not just in Northern Ireland, not just in Belfast, not just at the Royal Victoria Hospital, but in hospitals across the country, where addiction issues are becoming a real challenge for hospital staff and communities. The issue of drug misuse continues to be a priority for this organisation and for the officers in West Belfast. Local neighbourhood officers, response officers, and indeed our auto crime team have worked and continue to work with departments, including using the use of ANPR and the deployment of specialist search dogs to deal with this particular issue at the Royal Victoria Hospital. There have been a number of planned operations to tackle the issue, using a drug dog in the hospital grounds on at least 4 occasions. there is a reality, and I don't want to sound like a broken record, that the local policing team, I asked to look at how that configuration had been impacted by our budget. We've lost 50% of our resource in that local policing team. The resource that remains is often abstracted from doing the neighbourhood policing roles because of the other responsibilities that we have. What I want to assure you of, though, even with all of that, that we've increased arrests by over 30% in the rolling 12-month period to the end of June of this year in West Belfast. And since the beginning of the year, we've been actively engaged with our partners in the Hospital Trust, working on social media to highlight the issues and try to address them. This is something that we cannot do alone, but I share your concerns about it, Chair. I want to bring Bobby in to add more value to my response, but what I would say, we are seeing a dispersal of people from the city centre to the hospital with regards to drug addiction, and this is something that the police cannot deal with alone, and we certainly can't arrest our way out of it. But I'll bring Bobby in.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Just to say, conversations this week with a very frustrated local policing commander, because there's a great deal more that they would like to be doing around this and other issues. I think we talked to previous boards, the figure for local policing alone, in terms of the stress and pressures that we're under, would be in the region of around 900 officers short of what we think we should have. So that very much does limit this kind of preventative, proactive work that we absolutely want to be doing. And I would also recognise the fact that in circumstances like this, where the police aren't able to engage in this activity, there is a very real risk that others would seek to step into any perceived vacuum that's left behind. So I think as an example of an issue, it's a very relevant one in terms of not only the pressures that we're under, but also the very real risks that emerge from that as well.
Okay, thank you for that response. I'm going to move on to the next question from Gerry on IPT revelations.
Chief Constable, you'll be very aware of some articles in the media around the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, and I will be careful not to say anything which may intervene in that because it's ongoing. However, because it's public, I wanted to raise it, to read some of this out. A former or a senior PSNI officer was reported as saying to the SIO of Operation Erda, which is of course about the surveillance of journalists. And it says things like, the senior officer informed me the tensions within the legal system, advised me to exercise caution when dealing with solicitors, barristers and members of the judiciary, given the disproportionate representative of those from a Roman Catholic background. It goes on to talk about reference perverse decisions made by the courts due to the number of Catholics in the North's judiciary, and talks again about the prevalence of Catholics in background. Now, I'm not looking to make a decision on whether it happened or not, but it's out in the public. You are the Chief Constable. And if I could theorise it, put it that way, if that is said by a senior officer in the PSNI or an ex-senior officer in the PSNI, what would be your view of that?
So firstly, obviously, as you've alluded to, we have to be very careful because of any prejudice to the ongoing IPT proceedings. So that's first and foremost. And also I need to say, just to reassure you and the board, I have a very constructive and positive relationship with the Lady Chief Justice, and we as an organisation have absolute full confidence in our judiciary and work closely with them. I don't recognise those remarks as a matter of welfare because an officer has been named in the media. I've spoken to that officer to make sure that the officer's okay, a retired officer, and I think it's fair to say that those comments were not recalled by that officer and would be challenged from that officer with regards to what was said. And I think that's all I can really say on that this morning.
Good, Bruce. I mean, and the reason I'm pushing it is because obviously this has an effect on people who may believe what's out there. It's going to be investigated, not there. But the question I'm asking you is, if any officer made remarks like that, I presume that you would entirely disagree with?
Yeah, I sorry, Gerry, I cannot emphasise sufficiently how much I disagree with them. As I say, I've got full confidence in the judiciary. We have an extremely good relationship with the judiciary and our criminal justice partners per se. I saw the remarks last night. I don't recognise anything from those remarks in my time in Northern Ireland, working both in legacy investigations or as the Chief Constable. They're not correct. They're wrong. I've not seen anything that would reflect anything like that. And the officer who's been attributed to those remarks, I think, would share my views. And I think that's all I can say at the moment. Okay.
Thank you. There's a supplementary on this from Nuala.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you for the answer so far. Just touching on the previous question, more generally around the issue of sectarianism and how we tackle it in society, it's important that we also get the confidence from the public in policing and tackling that issue internally. But unfortunately from the board and what we have been privy to in terms of the cultural audit of the PSNI, it seems to have been a massive gap in terms of actually addressing whether it actually exists and how we have steps to actually tackle it. So I think this is an opportunity, you know, for yourself as Chief Constable to take those steps and what were missed before, and many of this board did raise at the time in tackling sectarianism within the PSNI, and whether that first step is acknowledging whether that does exist or not. So I think it's an important opportunity that shouldn't be missed.
Yeah, and I mean, just to reassure you, Nuala, you know, I have a very, very positive working relationship with the Catholic Guild. Anything that is drawn to my attention around any mistreatment of any group within the PSNI, we want to be an employer of choice. Nobody's more important than anybody else. We've got an extremely good relationship with all of our support networks through Your Voice. Obviously, we did the survey last year, which we think was a good starting position around addressing any cultural challenges, but we know we've got to focus on specific issues. That's part of the Team PSNI events as well. There is no place for that sort of behaviour in the PSNI, but I'll open up to Chris and see if anybody else wants to add any comments. I mean, what I will say is recently where I have been told of any even anecdotal stories of anybody suffering any sort of prejudice or unfairness within the organisation, I've personally gone to see them to find out the facts, to see if there's an issue. And that's my undertaking to you, and absolutely there is a zero tolerance for any behaviours like that. I hope that helps to reassure you, but I'll just invite the team, if I may, to add anything further.
Yeah, just to reinforce that, Nuala, the zero tolerance that the Chief just described there has been made clear to everybody in the organisation by a refreshment of our statement of intent. So that's something that has been published to every member of the service, sent out to every member of the service, and there's a means of measuring that everybody in the service has indeed read that and acknowledged that, and it spells out that there will be absolutely no tolerance of sectarianism or any other form of discrimination from anybody in the service.
Thank you, and I do think that that is positive to hear, and I don't get the sense of that from members that are sitting in front of me today, but unfortunately the figures that we do get, you know, that we are privy to, such as, you know, stop and search, for example, the number of cases that are through the professional standards department that relate to the number of Catholics employed by the PSNI, and the disproportionate number given the actual small number that are overall employed by the PSNI. So I do think this is a serious issue that needs tackled, given the figures that we do see each month through the various committees that come here. So I do hope that it is going to be taken on board.
I mean, I'm happy to take anything offline, Nuala, to make sure that we're doing everything that you'd hope that we'd be doing. But yeah, please be reassured by the messages we've given today, because they're heartfelt, and I think I can speak for everybody across this table and in this room indeed around those remarks. Okay.
Thank you. And if you do want to put a written request in, that's always open to us. Thank you. Chief, you mentioned about the removal of racist posters. Peter Osborne has a question on that subject.
Thanks, Chair. You've touched on it already, and in your report as well as in the comments before the meeting. Can I welcome, first of all, the removal of some of those posters? I'm not going to mention the area because I don't believe most people in that area will agree with those posters being constructed or put up and erected in the first place. But it is important. It's an important issue, I suppose, for a number of reasons. Two in particular. One is, as AC Singleton referred yesterday, there is ongoing fear within minority ethnic communities, and when posters like this go up and then are not removed, that can't do anything other than increase that fear and uncertainty, decrease the sense of belonging they might have in an area as well, and I don't believe the sentiment is majority sentiment within those communities. But I also think leaving those posters up undermines the whole system. It undermines the law, it undermines policing, it empowers that very small number of people who put posters like that up with the local perception that they can't be touched, maybe individually, but also the posters can't be touched. We also have had over the last week or so then the public discourse around who said what and who did what and who's responsible. And we have the 1987, I think, roads order, and that's quite clear. I think section 75, 85, 86 of it, but I stand to be corrected. We have a letter which was sent, and I don't know the content of that or where those issues lie. But can I ask you just, do you want to clarify that as a service a little bit more in terms of what did happen in that area? And I suppose, will there be collaboration in the future between agencies going forward? Because that is critical to removing posters, I would assume, that need to be removed in the future. And what can we expect in that sense? And I suppose, more importantly, not what can we expect, what can those minority ethnic communities and local communities who do not support the erection of these posters expect in the future between all of the agencies involved?
Well, firstly, Peter, I'm grateful for the question because this is an area that is of personal concern to me. And just for the, I suppose, the facts, the timeline, we as an organisation became first aware of posters on the 4th of August. We made requests of the Department for Infrastructure and the Northern Housing Executive to remove the posters, and the Northern Housing Executive did remove a poster from their property. On the 14th of August, we wrote to the DFI asking for a decision from them as to whether they were going to remove the material on their infrastructure. On the 3rd of September, they wrote to us informing us they wouldn't be taking it down and that it was a crime that had been committed and they considered it to be a police matter. I then asked to see the posters, and as soon as I saw the posters, I gave a very clear instruction they were to be taken down by our staff, and they were at a high. I'm always very conscious of health and safety. We've had these conversations before, that we could safely take them down, and they were taken down. There was no adverse reaction from the community to doing that. In fact, there was a positive reaction, and obviously positive reaction particularly from members of our diverse communities. On the 25th of September, interestingly, none of these posters appeared and we took it down immediately. We were too slow to do it, in my view. Collectively, there's responsibilities, not just for the PSNI in this. We've written back to the Minister at the Department for Infrastructure to get round a table to understand how we, with a shared endeavour to make sure that we address any form of this sort of hatred and hate crime, how we can deal with it to reassure our communities. We saw vile offences committed in July with regards to similar posters that predated the awful disorder we saw. I then met with a number of families from ethnic minority communities who talked to me about a litany of historical minor criminal damage and antisocial behaviour. This is something that we all have got to have a shared endeavour for. It goes to the programme for government around safer communities, and I think we need to be stronger at the executive level around these behaviours. But it's something that I want to assure you, and I know we've spoken about it previously, that it's a strategic priority for us, and that we'll be doing everything that we can to enforce the law around anybody who puts these hateful posters up or commits any hate crime. And this team and our officers and staff are entirely behind that position. But let me bring Bobby in, because he may want to add some additional information to that.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. And Les, just to say, I think from conversations that we've had with, in particular, the Muslim community, it's clear that the continued presence of these posters leads, at the very least, or let's say at best, to a feeling that the authorities are ambivalent to the harm that it's causing to them, but perhaps at worst, that we're somehow supportive of that sentiment. That is absolutely not the case, but it doesn't reflect well on any of the authorities whenever this material remains there. I have to say, we understand that there is a willingness from DFI to meet with us, to sit down and to work collectively to come up with a far more effective and timely response to this issue, and we welcome that, and we look forward now to moving forward on this issue and achieving a better solution for the entire community.
Well, Chair, can I welcome the response from both of you? And what I'm hearing is that the agencies involved therefore are willing to look at a more robust approach to the removal of these posters more promptly, and that we can expect perhaps that to play out in practice within areas where these sort of posters are put up. I can't, I think, re-emphasise enough the harm that it does collectively to the whole system and those agencies who are supportive of law and order and protecting people and keeping people safe and not being fearful. And just to remind you, and I think the Roads Order says that any cost of removal can be borne by the person or people who put those posters up. I hope that's something that is borne in mind, because I suspect if somebody is collared and has to appear before court or pay something for the removal, it may help in the future those posters not going up as often as they have.
Thank you. There's a supplementary on this from Peter McManus, if you're still minded.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the responses there, Chief. So I had put a question in on this as well, and I suppose in hearing your response there, it feels like at times there's been like a bit of a merry-go-round in terms of DFI, police, housing executive, who actually is it. So I'm reassured to hear that you've written to the Minister to actually discuss these points. What will that meeting be to, what will it seek to achieve? And will you be trying to iron out maybe having a designated single point of contact for the public to go to about things like this? Because it kind of feels like it'll just be another meeting that may lead to another merry-go-round that goes on and on again. So what will that meeting be to achieve?
So, you know my thoughts on some of the bureaucracy that I've encountered in Northern Ireland. We don't want bureaucracy. We want a shared response. I think we all have a shared endeavour against these posters. I think collectively we were too slow to take them down. If people aren't going to take them down, we'll take them down if we can. There are things that I get told off for asking my officers to do because it puts them at risk because they've not got the equipment to reach at high levels and stuff like that. But the aim of the meeting is to make sure that we have a response to deal with these posters where they come down as quickly as it is humanly possible for us to get them down. Personally, and I've spoken to Bobby about this, I want evidence gathering. I want to arrest and prosecute people who commit offences that are committed in this area. Because that will send the clearest message to people that it won't be tolerated. We've even discussed, there are all sorts of channels to contact us as the Police Service of Northern Ireland around offences, whether that's 101, 999 in emergency, online. But we are looking at, because I think we all need to reflect and take a moment on the behaviours that have been suffered by people from our diverse communities, on what we can do to make that reporting easier. So that if that is a separate portal, and we are introducing a victims portal shortly through enhancement of our IT, but we're looking at whatever we can do to make that as an easy process, as easy a journey as possible for victims of hate crime. And they're the discussions we're currently having. And that includes third-party reporting as well, because some people, for different reasons, may not want to report these matters to us. But that's the intention of the meeting. I don't know if Bobby wants to add any more.
Yeah, so I just re-emphasise, I mean, at present, the gateway for that is through reporting hate crime and hate incidents, and I'd continue to encourage everybody to do that where they see it. In terms of the question about what do we think we'll be discussing in that meeting, well, it has to be about making sure that we have an agreement in terms of the existing roles and responsibilities within the framework that's available to us. There are probably, I think everybody in the room would accept, limitations to that, possibly worth just reflecting that, you know, not just in terms of these displays, but things like flags as well. You know, we've been operating under a flags protocol that was agreed in 2005, you know, more than 20 years ago, nearly. That's been under review since 2008. We've had the FIC Commission report, and again, that was published in December 2021, but again, hasn't moved any further forward. We also collectively have a racial equality strategy, which all the kind of elements of the executive are signed up to. But again, that was last drafted, and we've been working under that now since 2015. So there are significant gaps here, but notwithstanding that, you know, I do firmly believe that there will be a will to work better within the existing framework. And the more medium to longer term piece, then again, I think we would welcome some action from the executive to unify all the different departments with a common goal to bring forward this societal response to racism and hate within our communities.
Thank you. Thank you again for all of the responses there. I'm going to move to Frank on a question on cybercrime, but just before we start that question, I have a load of questions here, which I know we're not probably going to get time to get through them all. If I call on members and you're happy to move those to a written question, please indicate, and then we can move on. And can I also ask you all to be very brief in your questioning? And as always, if you can be brief in your responses, thank you. Frank?
Okay, thanks, Chair. That obviously starts after me. Chief Constable, cybercrime is rapidly emerging as a crime that I believe will increasingly threaten and hurt all of our community. Businesses, households, charities, the young and the old will all become more vulnerable as the cyber criminals become more sophisticated. Can you share with us your views of that threat and how you, as an organisation, will resource against it? And if you could give one message to everybody assembled here and online as to how the public should guard against it, what would it be?
So I absolutely agree that the biggest challenge to policing currently is the use of online for committing crime and espousing hatred that we saw again through the recent disorder. It's probably the biggest challenge to us. I actually did some work for a thesis in understanding cybercrime and the cyber criminal. I met a number of criminals who actually hadn't previously offended but saw cybercrime and online crime as a way to make money without putting themselves at risk of being arrested, and they could have access to an endless pool of victims. We are working tirelessly in this area, and I'll bring Davy Beck in. I raised this particular issue, and some of you will have seen the Just Eat documentary around some, businesses who are trying their best to make a living and have been defrauded by the accounts not being paid to them through Just Eat. In those cases, by the way, we've reported all of those to Action Fraud, as is the protocol to do so. And those accounts where that money has gone is outside of the jurisdiction, it's overseas. And there is a reality here that if somebody who's vulnerable gets mugged in the street, they get an incredibly good service. We meet them, we give them witness support, witness care. If they were to lose money they were trying to take out the bank will probably reimburse them. When you get these crimes online, it's the devil's own job sometimes for vulnerable victims to actually report these cases. So this is an issue for the entire sort of police family to deal with. But the best thing is to protect ourselves against these crimes, because so many of them are perpetrated from overseas, and educate people around security. And that's the sort of second tenet of your question was, what's the message you would give? Never be complacent, always be vigilant. And the simple one for me is never give your account details to anybody under any circumstances, whatever may be sold to you as a reason for doing that. There are basic things like strong and unique password protection, two-step verification on accounts. There is enabling your security features on your personal devices, such as your PIN codes, fingerprint and Face ID, updating devices to make sure the right protections on those devices, and ensure that any information you have got is backed up. But never, ever, ever pass your bank details or your credit card details to anyone. But with that, I'll pass over to Davey to give some information on the actual tactical steps that we've taken and what we provide.
Chief, sorry, could I just interject? Apologies. I have a question from Alan Chambers. You mentioned Just Eat, and this is not because we're approaching lunch. Alan, you have a question on Just Eat as well, because it's part of this conversation.
The Chief Constable could give me a brief, or the board a brief update on where the investigations are in that. I know that in the documentary it was a bit concerning to hear some of the victims say that they had contacted the police some months ago and hadn't had any feedback from them. Just wonder if the Chief Constable would want to address that.
So obviously that's disappointing if that's the case, Alan, and I'll make sure that those victims are contacted. Between December 21 and May 24, we've got 12 reports of fraudulent activity. As I mentioned, I specifically raised this at my quarterly meeting with the Commissioner to see what we could do collectively to address that. With regards to those accounts that I've spoken about, those cases, the accounts where the money's been fraudulently transferred, all those are outside the jurisdiction of Northern Ireland. So that's why I talk about education and the protection between those businesses and the Just Eat franchise to make sure that those accounts, if you like, can't be intercepted, and that money goes to those small businesses who need that money. And you know, that's a significant element in answering the question. Where there are any offences committed by people who are within our jurisdiction, as I mentioned to Commissioner Harris, we need to send a message by going after them and prosecuting them. But if I can just hand over to Davey, he may expand on that, but also on the general point that was raised around cybercrime.
Yeah, thanks, Chief. And I suppose firstly it's important to say that the motivation behind cybercrime can vary. It can vary from state-sponsored actors really seeking to obtain sensitive information or indeed intellectual property through to monetary motivations, and indeed individuals who are seeking access to social media and potentially to private, intimate images of internet and social media users. So we're all at risk from this, is the first point to make. We have seen significant evolution of technology, connectivity, and of course that increases the opportunities for criminals to exploit victims of crime. So crime's changing, as is the complexity of the investigations into those types of crime, including cybercrime, and the impacts on individuals, communities, organisations, and indeed businesses can be quite significant. So that's why we as an organisation have invested significantly in our PSNI Cyber Centre, and I know many of you as board members have visited the Cyber Crime Centre, and we'll continue to work with our partners, including the NCA and the National Cyber Crime Centre, to maximise that collaborative approach to many of those crime types. We have enhanced our training for our officers, particularly in areas such as cryptocurrency, the dark web, etc. And that's about us keeping up pace with the particular trends. And we continue to liaise with our partner organisation in terms of tracking those trends to make sure that we are as informed as we possibly can be in respect of those. Generally, there are two forms of cybercrime. So cyber-dependent crime, so that's your hacking type offences in terms of social media, email accounts where there's unauthorised access of your information. Ransomware, which looks at locking or encrypting a victim's IT data and systems. Network intrusion, again, where there's unauthorised penetration of IT systems.
and denial of service attacks, where really the attackers would hope to overwhelm the online resource, and that causes the web services to effectively crash or fail. And that can cause significant harm over protracted periods of time for businesses. There's then cyber-enabled crime, so some historical crimes that are assisted and conducted through online mechanisms such as blackmail, online fraud, sextortion, and harassment and stalking. So we are alive to those risks, and we continue to work, as I say, with our partners to do all we can to address, investigate, and indeed educate users in terms of those measures, many of which the Chief has mentioned in terms of how you can protect yourselves. So we do also have a cyber protect capability, and we'll work with, as I say, the National Cyber Security Centre and with other organisations and indeed businesses, other sectors, charities and individuals to educate, to raise awareness and enhance that internet security across the piece. So as the Chief says, really, the main issue is around maintaining cyber security, both collectively as organisations, but also as individuals, and ultimately never give personal details. Check and double check all those issues. In terms of Just Eat, again, as the Chief had said, we have in the region of 12 reports, and the Chief has outlined that our initial investigations have confirmed that the money was transferred out of Northern Ireland. So in line with Home Office guidance, all those cases have been referred to Action Fraud. And once they're referred, the responsibility in terms of that engagement with those victims also transfers to Action Fraud. But we have picked up on some of those concerns that were expressed last week, and the local commander has reached out to some of those victims just to provide that additional level of reassurance on. From our perspective, we have asked our economic crime unit to review all those cases, and that's just to ensure that if there are any, again, trends, patterns and particular issues that we can address, and indeed if we can identify suspects locally, that we are live to that, and we will continue to review those types of cases to build up both our own knowledge and information to help educate businesses more widely, but also look at opportunities to actually bring some of these people to justice in terms of what they're doing. And we've seen evidence of that. I know we've reported on that in previous monthly reports from the Chief Constable in terms of action we have taken around some of those activities. But we've also met with the Northern Ireland Food to Go Association, and we've continued to meet with them as well, just to advise and help them to safeguard their association and their membership.
I think the message coming out of the remarks is that the ability to avoid becoming a victim lies in our own hands.
Okay, thank you for that. Just there, and I know there are some members visiting NCA next week. It might be something that we could raise there as well whenever we're there. I have a question from Trevor Clarke on NPCC guidance. Trevor.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask you, Chief Constable, in relation to the National Police Chief Council's guidance on common law police disclosures, did the PSNI provide Sinn Féin with any information highlighting the potential responsibility to consider forwarding information shared with them in relation to the McGonigal case? If so, can you tell us who you shared it with? Will it be an elected representative or a member of staff? And then also, do you believe that in them sharing that with another employer that could prejudice any police investigations?
So I know this is, again, it's the police is the lightning rod here. I don't want to get dragged into any political tit for tat stuff here. I'll be quite frank. I don't know enough about it, Trevor. I learned about this story last night. I was coming back from a conference where I had to speak. What I will say is, if indeed we did reach out to Sinn Féin to give information that concerned us about an individual that we felt they should know about, that wouldn't prejudice an investigation. That would allow an investigation to happen. That's just a responsibility around any notification requirements we've got. So we have some duty to notify organisations if they would have somebody working for them who had a conviction for certain sexual offences, particularly offences against children. I became aware of this story particularly today. we can't track organisations who are receiving information about individuals who might be working for them. If people write to us, then we'll respond to those people if there's a concern about an individual. There's not a lot more I can really say about that. I know everyone's trying to drag the PSNI into this. If the question is, would that prejudice an investigation? The answer is, and I don't know the detail, I don't see how it would prejudice an investigation, if that's helpful. But I'm not into the detail of that. We can do a written response around what the MPCC policy is and what our policy is. But of course, why would that prejudice an investigation? It wouldn't. Is that helpful?
That's helpful, and I suppose I'll not supplement that. I mean, if you're going right to that, that will be useful.
Okay.
But I'll use the liberty to actually ask a second question then about the Environmental Alliance. There was promises made some months ago in relation to the Environmental Alliance to police staff. So just wondering what the position is with that today.
Yeah, and thanks for asking that question. So one of the things, obviously, I was concerned about when I arrived here is is where the workforce were because of, and we heard from the ICO Commissioner this morning about the data breach because of what happened. The first thing that was highlighted to me when I met the NIPSA, the Police Staff Association, was their real anger about the lack of the environmental allowance being provided to them. I think since then we've moved a million miles basically. I met with the Minister, Naomi Long, and NIPSA representatives on Monday. Pamela was at that meeting. We had undertaken to reach a position by the end of September to get this entire matter resolved. You'll recall that I think it was July we paid an interim payment. The revised environmental allowance, which I'll describe as the danger money for police staff being part of the PSNI. We have a similar allowance for police officers, NITA, the Northern Ireland Transition Allowance. The revised environmental allowance hadn't changed for a number of years. That interim payment in July in good faith was to show that we were going to increase the allowance. The allowance was £580. We've now done a business case from the PSNI, which has gone through the Department of Justice, is now with the Department of Finance, for a figure of £1,365 a year. I know NIPSA and their members are very happy about that. One of the things, though, that was required by the Department of Finance, and in fact all parties, I think it's a safeguard for everybody so we don't get into this position again where the allowance isn't updated, is an annual review. The annual review is the one element of the work that we've not yet resolved. We've got to come up with a mechanism for an annual review. I want that annual review to be satisfactory to everybody, primarily workforce focused. I want NIPSA to be happy about how that annual review is done. So Pamela's going to do some work to resolve that. I know that the Minister, Naomi Long, has spoken to her counterpart in finance, the Finance Minister, about the importance of this being agreed, this business case. So I'm hoping to get a positive response on that in the next 2 weeks at the latest. I met with online on, I think it was Tuesday, the NIPSA representatives to ask questions of me. I think it's the first time the Chief Constable has been on a meeting forum like that. I can't speak the entirety of the audience, but I think generally people are very pleased about the progress that's been made. Have we got it over the line by the end of September? Not quite, but the intention is, if the agreement comes from the Department of Finance, that from April next year, their allowance, their REA, will move from 580 to 1365. There'll be an annual review mechanism that all parties can be reassured is a sensible provision to make sure that allowance doesn't get lost like it has previously, which will probably kick in at the end of 2025 to see what that allowance should be going forward. That's basically where we are. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Constable, for that. We've got 3 questions to go through. I'm going to ask Les Allenby on revenue raising.
Thank you, Chair, and Chief Constable. In view of the recent written reply that significant costs for services to Dalriad and Gold were invoiced and then deemed to be security related and not collected, I wonder if you could set out what are considered as chargeable for special police services and what revenue is currently raised and whether you feel that more could be done in this area. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Les. Obviously, because of our financial position, this is an issue I've asked for the team to focus on. What I would say, it's a stated aim in our financial strategy to maximise income generation wherever possible. And you'll be aware that unlike many police forces, we have to manage a number of large-scale events as the PSNI, which we're simply not funded to do. There are 4 key categories of events where police services can be charged. They are commercial events and or enterprises, non-commercial events and or enterprises, sporting events, both commercial and non-commercial, and Northern Ireland Executive sponsored events or enterprises. With regards to your previous question and the specifics with regards to the mining services, we sought legal advice on that particular issue around revenue recovery. We were told in that legal advice that these services do not meet the definition of special police services, and therefore costs are not recoverable. But I will keep that under review, and there may be other things that we can do to reduce our demand in that particular area, and that we can satisfy our need for security in other ways. But let me bring in Mark and Pamela, because they may have some more helpful information on wider opportunities.
So very briefly, because of time, Liz, I think what is usually asked to get some kind of idea of the amount of money we actually recover through the special policing services, and it is very limited. It was only a couple of £100,000 last year, so we are in the margins of things because it's only for services which meets the very clearly legally defined criteria, and it's over and above our core policing services. So our opportunity to raise income in that area is limited. And that case that you mentioned around the kind of explosive and blasting industry is just an example of how complex it can be in terms of those charges. So absolutely, we try to maximise the revenue that we can through those services, because every little helps in our current sort of financial climate. But we have a dedicated framework in order to make decisions around it. It's in line with national guidance, but it is very much in the margins. There isn't a pot there of potentially millions of pounds which would be available to supplement our activity. That's not the kind of place we're in with it.
Can I just bring Mel in on this one as well, please, Chair?
Yeah, Chair, I'm mindful of time, but just in relation to the explosives and blastings, just to be clear that our presence at those sites is around our statutory responsibilities around explosives and mass blasting, and it is not, as the legal advice confirmed, deliveries of special policing services. But I do think we have some opportunities in that area, because we probably still do things how we did things many, many years ago, when actually the physical environment that we were working in was very different. And I think that we can review how we deliver our obligations around security, around explosives and blasting, taking into account changes in industry standards, taking into account the changes in the security situation here. But we need to do that in a really carefully measured way, because we're not the only person with responsibilities. So the NIO has responsibilities, and the Health and Safety Executive have responsibilities. And what we don't want to do is drop the ball and make sure that then nobody's discharging the responsibilities in such an important area of business. So I think we've got some opportunities. My intention is to look at that and to look at how we can deliver the services more effectively, more efficiently, while still making sure it is effective in terms of security.
Thank you.
Chair, given time, I'm happy to follow up with a written question to get some more fine-grained details. So okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Two more. I've got a question from Cheryl Brownlee on the results from the recent Victims of Crime survey.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the Chief Constable so far. I just wanted to touch on, obviously, the really, really concerning statistics from the Victims of Crime survey. And whilst you've obviously stated about the low sample size, what really concerns me is this was devised by people who had actually engaged within that service, and it was also advertised within the courts throughout Northern Ireland. So it seemed very, very specific and targeted to people that had been in that situation. Whilst I also acknowledge the policing plan, the methodology shows it was conducted by a market research company based on a sample of age, gender, location and things like that. And those surveyed, there was only 9.4 who had actually been a victim of crime within the last 2 years. So there's a bit of a concern from me basically seeing those statistics, because it was shocking that that's the way people had felt. So it's just based on those results of the survey, what actions will the PSNI take to improve the experience of those that have been a victim of crime?
So I obviously want us to be victim focused. This goes back to the legacy work I did and how we speak to people, acknowledge what they've been through, help them often go through, make sense of, try to move forward from unimaginably difficult events that have befallen them, and arrest those people responsible and engage them through the criminal justice system. I've met with Geraldine and on a number of occasions to explain I want us to be victim focused, and she's keen to work with us. I've yet to speak to her about the survey. I wasn't aware of some of the detail. I've read it, every word of it. And even a number of the cases, there are 166 in the sample of victims. There was over 10% didn't think that the police would actually be involved in those cases. There was obviously some additional information in those cases that I don't want to talk in the public session about, but I want to understand about vulnerabilities and how we can help those victims. So I think this is the sort of start of the journey with some of that information to understand it. Also, I think helpfully the next board survey is probably about to get underway, so it'll be very interesting to see how that compares with this information. But one of the things I would say is that we often need to have bespoke services for certain victims, and I'm not sure we have got that yet in place within the PSNI. So this might be the beginning of understanding what we need to do. So I'll speak to Geraldine and work with her so that collectively we can try and ensure any future surveys have a very different position to this one.
No, thank you, Sharon. I really appreciate that response. Just within the survey, what had kind of came out to me was the mental health was a huge aspect of this, and then obviously how the justice system supports those with mental health difficulties, as well as the knowledge of the Victims Charter. It was, I think, 17%, so it was very, very low. So it's how we can work collectively all together to ensure people know their rights, obviously, as a victim. So I appreciate your response, and I think it's maybe something that we can keep on the agenda moving forward.
Yeah, it was just not far, much under 50% of people. So yeah, all that stuck out to me. So yeah, there's work to do, and I look forward to sitting down with Geraldine to see what we can do.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you for your response. Moving to the final question from Tommy O'Reilly on the PSNI digital strategy and the use of artificial intelligence.
Chief Constable, thank you very much. Digital technology over the last 10 years has moved forward to help transform many of our largest public sector organisations, including police services, as they deliver services to the general public, moving away from paper-based systems to ones which are much more electronic. In the short term, this process of transformation would likely to continue to accelerate, driven by the use of generative artificial intelligence solutions and how these can be used to further improve the delivery of public services. The PSNI digital strategy, the current version, is due for renewal very soon, and ahead of it coming to one of the committees of the board, I wanted to ask you and perhaps other members of the team, if you had, what would be the 2 or 3 AI-driven initiatives that you think you'd like to see implemented over the next 5 years, which would really improve services to the public and also support police officers in delivering their jobs?
Well, thanks for your question, Tommy. A lot we've talked about today really is about the modernisation of organisations, particularly in law enforcement, police services, around cybercrime, digital services, etc. For me, and it's deliberately the first thing I talk about, being victim focused. It sort of goes into the last question. We've got a portal that's been designed, a citizens portal to update victims, that's about to go live. It's being stress tested at the moment. For me to see some sort of digital capability that allows us to update our communities and our victims in a way that we aren't currently able to do is a real focus to me. One of the things though around AI and technology, there's sort of 3 key strategic issues I think to keep to the forefront of our mind. Firstly, how can we increase the productivity in the organisation through AI? And a challenge I've given to Pamela, and we've already brought people in from other police forces, the PSNI, to see our ICT senior team, see how we can do that. So increase productivity, increase the effectiveness, that might be the citizen portal, but it might be other things, of how we're delivering those services. And finally, how do we actually counter criminals using AI? How do we make sure that we've got a focus on addressing how AI can be used in the criminal space? But for me, that victim focus is where I want to be in this citizens portal. What I will say, and I know the people around this table know my position, our ICT isn't where it needs to be. We've got to be far more, I think, aggressive. We're very conscious of security. We've heard about the data breach this morning from the Information Commissioner, but I think we are still probably in a mindset where we aren't audacious enough around using modern digital capabilities in a way that's often much safer than people realise. We think there's a risk because of the cloud. There are so many mechanisms to provide levels of security there that intelligence agencies use, and we need to be there. Final thing I'd say about that, interestingly, there's redaction tools that you often use in dealing with disclosure. Other forces are using them, we've not been, because we've got this concern about security because of the history of this place. Those redaction tools, and I've seen a couple of them, are actually far better than a human being doing some of that redaction. So it's a space I'm really keen to be quite aggressive in, and I'm being quite challenging to the team. But let me hand you over to Mark, and Pamela might want to add something, or any of the team actually, around things they think could help.
Thanks, Chief. Yeah, just a couple of other areas maybe, because you had asked for 2 or 3 in terms of our forward-looking piece, and the Chief mentioned just sort of our interaction with a citizen, and obviously that's clearly a space we want to be in. But I think the other big area is around productivity and driving efficiency, and particularly the use of voice to text for us. So I know even some of our business areas we've piloted that, but with so much interview material, video recordings, we're capturing things digitally, and it's using generative AI to consolidate that, to produce reports, to enable prompts that would really free up officer time and staff time and enable us to concentrate on other things. So those are kind of ready and tested technologies that we would like to see sort of land and expand within the service over the next 2 to 3 years in particular, as well as that sort of a victim focus element around our portal. So yeah, thank you.
And if I could just add as well, Chair, just for information of those board members that aren't aware, I have a national responsibility which is closely linked to this as well. So I have a national responsibility around data analytics. There's a clear synergy between data analytics and AI and machine learning, etc. So I work with national colleagues a lot in this space, co-chair a number of boards and sit on some of the national boards. That's primarily around improving national capabilities and services, etc. But I've got specific responsibility for a capability we've been trying to build nationally. We've done a lot of work there, made great progress. So we're now in a position where we're starting to roll out some products and services from that. And just to give you the assurance that I'm taking every opportunity I possibly can to make sure that PSNI are benefiting from what we're developing on the national environment. I won't go into all the details for the sake of time, but just to give you one example, we dealt with a national issue around data recently. Identified a solution from elsewhere, tested that out before we rolled it out nationally, and took the opportunity to use PSNI as the test case for that. So we got access to that at no additional cost, saved hundreds of staff hours in resolving that particular issue. So we are taking the opportunities wherever we possibly can.
Just as supplementary to all that, I mean, AI also, amongst the general population, also raises concerns about the use of the data. So can you give us some assurances around what work's going on within PSNI around the issue about data protection, around privacy and other human rights, and what work will be taken forward in terms of the new digital strategy?
Yeah, so actually the national digital strategy has just been refreshed at the moment. So whenever we look at a strategy, we look at strategic alignment. So we'll make sure that we do align with the national one once that's finalised. That is a work in progress. But in terms of what we're doing locally, we've got a number of recommendations which came out of the independent review, you'll be aware, to cover some of these issues. There's also recommendations from the human rights report from last year, which cut across data ethics, etc. as well. So that's one specific area that we're looking at. AI is something that we would look at in terms of the way in which we improve data quality sometimes, but it's a work in progress. We've not got those measures in place at the moment. And when you work through the 37 recommendations that we had from the independent review, 19 of those have been closed off. That leaves 18 to still be worked on, and some of those are regrettably slower because they require investment in systems and services such as the use of AI that would improve things. So we're constantly scanning and looking for opportunities to improve what we're doing there. But at the moment, we are having to mitigate some of those risks, as the ICO Commissioner explained earlier, to give the assurance that we are managing data effectively, we are keeping it safe, we are complying with all of our requirements, but we could absolutely do more if we could have improved systems and access to new technology as well on top of that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chief Constable, and thank you to all of your team for all of your responses today. And thank you to board members for all of your questions. Could I also thank those who have joined us online today for joining us, and also a thank you to the team here at the board for all of your support and keeping us all right as board members. And finally, just to say, our next public session will be in the same place at the same time